That night, my father Richard Dawson's rage came without warning. Yet in truth, I had felt it brewing for years, and when I refused to sign a $5 million loan to rescue my brother Paul, his hand became iron. His fist exploded against my jaw with such crushing force that I heard the bone crack a brutal snap inside my skull louder than my own scream. Pain tore through my face as the chandelier above fractured into spinning shards of light, and the taste of blood filled my mouth, warm and metallic, running down my chin onto the rug. That rug was Persian. My mother's pride, a piece she had boasted about to neighbors for decades, and as my blood soaked its threads, she stepped forward. Her pearls glinting coldly, her silk blouse unwrinkled by concern. She did not cry out, she did not lift a hand to help. Her eyes lingered, not on my broken jaw, but on the red stain spreading into the fibers, and her voice rose sharp and merciless. "Sign the $5 million loan, Clara. Be grateful." Her command landed harder than the punch of verdict that my life was worth less than the carpet beneath me. My father's shadow loomed above his voice, a growl. "Maybe now you will learn to keep that filthy mouth of yours shut." My jaw throbbed, my body shook, and humiliation crashed over me like fire and ice. In their eyes, I was not a daughter. I was a signature, a scapegoat, a body to be broken so my brother could be saved. For a moment, despair nearly drowned me, but through the blur of tears, I forced a crooked smile, blood seeping between my teeth. They thought they had silenced me. They thought I was defeated. They had no idea that this was the moment I stopped being their victim and started becoming their reckoning. The Dawson family name was known in our town not for kindness but for wealth displayed in polished wood and cold perfection. My father, Richard Dawson, 58 years old, was the owner of Dawson's Woodwork, a furniture business that supplied judges, politicians, and high-end hotels. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and his temper hidden behind doors. At home, he ruled with the same authority he brought to the showroom floor, every word treated like law, every decision final. My mother, Margaret Dawson, 56, was the perfect partner in his theater dressed in pearls and silk. Her laugh rehearsed her opinions, borrowed from my father's. She did not argue, she enforced. If Richard was the iron fist, Margaret was the velvet glove that covered it ready to strike when the image of family loyalty needed protection. Then there was Paul Dawson, my older brother, 35, a man who had never faced consequence because my parents erased every failure with money and excuses. He failed out of college, they said the professors were biased. He gambled away thousands they claimed the casino cheated him. He started 3 businesses, each collapsed under debt, and my parents insisted he was a visionary ahead of his time. Now he owed millions, and rather than let him drown, they demanded I give him my lifeline. I was Clara Dawson, 32, the quiet daughter, the one who paid her own bills and worked as a senior accountant at a logistics firm, the one who never asked them for anything. My life was small, but mine. I had earned promotions, built savings, and carved independence in a family that treated me as a spare part. Yet to my parents, independence was betrayal. To them, my discipline and caution were insults to Paul's reckless charm. Richard often said, "Paul has the spirit, Clara has the paperwork." And when Paul fell into a $5 million pit of debt, the paperwork became my prison. They demanded that I sign as guarantor for a loan because banks still trusted me. They told me it was family duty, that without me, the Dawson name would crumble, that my sacrifice was required. My father sat me in his office-framed diplomas on the wall, a shelf of expensive bourbon behind him, and he spoke with calm menace. "Clara, you will sign this loan. You will save your brother, and you will not shame this family." My mother added her venom with a smile. "Think of it as gratitude, darling. Without your father and me, you would have nothing." That was the script of my childhood rewritten in new ink. I remembered being 15 and asking to keep my weekend job money only to be told it belonged to the family fund. I remembered bringing home awards and hearing them compared to Paul's smallest achievements. Now, even as an adult with my own career, I was told my worth existed only in what I could provide for them. The Dawson household was not a home, it was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom. The chandelier in the dining room sparkled not as light, but as chains. each crystal a reminder that appearances mattered more than truth. Family dinners were ceremonies where Richard boasted about Paul's empty victories. Margaret nodded, and I sat silent. Every choice I had tried to make for myself was blocked, ridiculed, or stolen. When I told them I wanted to invest in my own apartment, Richard said, that money will be safer in Paul's company. When I told them I wanted to travel, Margaret said, you cannot abandon your brother, he needs you. It was always Paul, always sacrifice, always control. My refusal to sign the loan was not just about money. It was about survival. It was about finally saying no to a lifetime of erasure. But in the Dawson family, saying no was an unforgivable crime. The night it all shattered was not sudden in truth. It was the peak of a mountain of years of small humiliations and buried rage. But the moment my father's fist broke across my jaw, it felt like the beginning of a war. The sound of bone cracking was followed by my body collapsing onto the floor, my cheek pressed against the Persian rug that my mother adored more than her own daughter. My blood soaked its threads, dark red, blooming like a stain she would never forgive me for. Richard stood above me, his chest heaving, his face twisted with contempt, and his words dripped venom. Maybe now you will learn to keep that filthy mouth shut. The pain in my jaw was sharp and spreading, shooting up into my temple, and I felt hot tears filling my eyes even as I tried to hold them back. My mother Margaret swept into the room, her heels clicking against the marble, not in panic, but in irritation. Her eyes swept over me as if I were a mess to be cleaned, not a daughter broken on the floor. "Look what you have done, Clara," she said coldly. "You pushed him too far." She reached down with her manicured hand and nudged my shoulder with the toe of her shoe. "Get up! Do not bleed on the rug. It was worth more than you." The cruelty of her words dug deeper than the fist. I tried to speak, but my swollen jaw betrayed me, blood pooling in my mouth, choking the words before they could leave. All I could hear was Paul's laughter echoing from the hallway, his voice casual and amused. "She deserves it, Dad. She thinks she is better than us." My body trembled, humiliation burning hotter than the pain. They were a chorus of betrayal, each voice louder than my own. My father's growl, my mother's cold command, my brother's mocking laugh, they blended into a single verdict. I was guilty of independence, guilty of defiance, guilty of not sacrificing myself fast enough for their empire of lies. I remembered moments from my past flashing before my blurred vision, the time my mother slapped me across the face for crying, when Paul wrecked my bicycle, the time my father tore up my college acceptance letter because it was not Ivy League, the time Paul lost thousands gambling and they said it was my duty to cover him. All those memories collapsed into this single night, into this single bloody moment where my jaw throbbed and my spirit teetered between breaking and burning. I pulled myself up slowly, my body weak but my eyes fixed on them. For a second, I saw their contempt clearly like a mirror reflecting the truth. They did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as a tool, a signature, a body to sacrifice, a name to use when Paul's debts needed paying. Margaret's voice sliced through the air again, dripping with disgust. "You are a useless thing, Clara. If you truly loved this family, you would sign without a word." Richard's glare added weight to her demand. "You will sign tomorrow, no arguments." Paul's smirk twisted it into mockery. "Everyone knows you owe us." The fury rose inside me, not a wild flame, but a cold, steady fire. My jaw ached, my body shook, but my mind was sharper than ever. I knew in that moment that my parents had mistaken obedience for weakness all these years. They thought breaking my body would silence me forever. They did not realize that their cruelty had lit something that would not die. I stood swaying, tasting blood, and I did not answer them. Silence was my shield, my first act of rebellion. I turned and walked away, each step a battle, each breath a declaration that I was not theirs anymore. Behind me I heard Margaret's hiss. "You will regret this, Clara." But for the first time I knew regret belonged to them. When I reached my bedroom that night, the silence was louder than the violence downstairs, and my reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, my jaw already swelling into a grotesque mask of purple and red. My lips split, my eyes wide with shock but steady with something new. My father's punch had broken bone. My mother's words had carved deeper wounds, and Paul's laughter had echoed like salt poured into all of it, but inside the wreckage a new voice rose, quiet, deliberate, refusing to be drowned. I locked my door, the click of the bolt feeling like the first true wall I had ever built between me and them. My training as an accountant had given me habits of discipline, steps, order, process, and now those habits guided me in survival. First, assess the damage. I leaned forward into the bright bathroom lights, tilting my face, studying every angle, seeing the blood, drying the skin, puffing. Second, document. I lifted my phone, my hands shaking, but my purpose stronger than fear, and I snapped photos, left side, right side, close on the split lip, wide enough to capture the swelling. Each picture was more than evidence. Each picture was a piece of armor, a layer of truth they could not erase with their money or their lies. Third record. I pressed video, lifted the phone, and spoke, my voice low but firm, despite the pain. Clara Dawson, 32 years old, assaulted in my own home by Richard Dawson at approximately 2200 hours. Mother Margaret Dawson, complicit. Demand to sign fraudulent $5 million loan for Paul Dawson. This is my record. I ended the video, uploaded it to the encrypted cloud account I had created years ago for financial documents now repurposed for survival. They would not trap me in silence anymore. Then came the fourth step. Communication. My hands scrolled to a single contact under one word, Blackbird. It was the code name I had given my best friend, Nora Bennett, a woman who had stood by me since college, a woman who had fought her own battles against control and knew what it meant to bleed for freedom. We had promised each other years ago, if the day ever came when family or danger broke the line, we would call. My voice was hoarse when she answered, but the code came out clear. Blackbird. There was no hesitation in her response, only the firm voice of a lawyer who had turned pain into weapons of justice. Understood. Stay locked in. I am on my way. I slid down against the door after hanging up my body, trembling, the pain radiating across my face, but in the tremor there was resolve. The silence of my room was no longer suffocating. It was strategy. Downstairs, the chandeliers still glowed, the rug still stained, my parents still believing I would break. But upstairs in that locked room, I was no longer their daughter to command. I was my own witness, my own soldier preparing for a different kind of war. The loan papers sat downstairs waiting for my signature, but what they did not know was that I had just signed something else, a silent contract with myself, a vow carved in blood and bone. I would resist not with screaming or pleading, but with truth, with evidence, with law, and with the strength of someone who had finally understood she had nothing left to lose. When Nora Bennett arrived, the knock on my bedroom door was sharp but controlled a sound that told me safety had come in human form. I unlocked it slowly, my face half hidden behind swollen flesh, and she stepped inside with the steady eyes of a woman who had already braced herself for the worst. She was 33, tall with dark hair pulled back, dressed in simple slacks and a blazer, and when she looked at me, she did not gasp or pity. She assessed like a soldier walking into a battlefield, her training as a lawyer and her friendship with me combining into something stronger than sympathy. She set down her briefcase, pulled out a small medical kit she carried for emergencies, and pressed ice wrapped in cloth against my jaw. I winced, the sting shooting through my face, but her presence anchored me. She did not fill the silence with empty words. She simply said, "You did the right thing, Clara. We will handle this." As the ice numbed my pain, memories flooded without warning, each one connected like beads on a thread. A necklace of cruelty I had worn my entire life without admitting it. At 12, I had saved months of allowance to buy a new bicycle only for Paul to take it out drunk with his friends and crash it into a lamppost. When I cried over the twisted frame, Margaret slapped me and said, "Stop your noise, Clara. Your brother needs space to be young." At 18, I opened my college acceptance letter, the university not Ivy League, but still prestigious, and while I held it with pride, Richard frowned and muttered, "Not good enough." Paul was failing his classes then, but they still called him the future. At 25, when I got my first bonus, I planned to invest in an apartment of my own, but Richard told me flatly that the money was better used to cover Paul's gambling debts, and Margaret nodded her pearl necklace gleaming as she reminded me, "Family comes first, darling." Each memory rose now sharper than the ice on my jaw, proof that this night was not an accident, but the climax of a lifetime of theft and erasure. Nora listened as I spoke in fragments, my voice shaky, my words soaked in the bitterness of years. She did not interrupt, only wrote notes in her legal pad, her hand moving quickly. When I finished, she looked at me with fire in her eyes. "They have built a pattern, Clara. This is not one act of violence. This is a structure and we will tear it down." Her certainty gave me strength, and in that moment, I saw my parents and brother not as untouchable giants, but as criminals who had been shielded by silence for too long. Nora began outlining steps, legal measures, ways to secure my finances, ways to present evidence. I felt a flicker of hope, but it carried with it the weight of grief, because even with a lawyer at my side, part of me still craved something I knew I would never have. The simple love of a mother who would choose her daughter over a rug. The proud smile of a father who would see my independence as strength, not betrayal. Those dreams died on the marble floor when my jaw broke, and all that remained was strategy. As Nora iced my wounds, she told me we would gather allies, people who had seen what the Dawson family really was. Coworkers who noticed my bruises, neighbors who heard shouting doctors who treated unexplained injuries. Every witness mattered. Every piece of paper mattered. I nodded, my jaw aching, but inside me a spark had caught. For years I had believed silence was survival. Now I understood that survival would only come with resistance, smart and unrelenting. Nora squeezed my hand, her voice low but unshakable. "You are not alone in this anymore." That was the first time in years I believed it. The Dawson family never tolerated defiance, and by the next morning their counterattack was already in motion, precise and cruel, as if they had rehearsed it for years. I woke to messages from my bank that my accounts had been frozen, suspicious activity they claimed, though I knew it was nothing more than Richard calling in favors from old business partners. The debit card I relied on was useless, every transaction declined, and a chill crept through me as I realized how carefully they had kept a leash around my finances, even when I thought I was free. Nora cursed under her breath when she saw the alerts scribbling down notes, her mind already racing through legal remedies, but the damage was clear. They wanted to starve me into submission to make independence impossible until I signed that loan. While we studied the bank notifications, another blow landed. My phone vibrated with a flood of emails, all from Paul's friends and business associates, filled with whispers that I was unstable, that I had emotional problems, that I was on medication for depression. The lies were polished professional, written in careful language designed not to sound hysterical but convincing. Margaret's touch was all over them. She had always known how to twist words until truth bled away. My heart hammered as I read lines about how Clara needs guidance, how Clara is too fragile to understand the weight of family duty. I slammed the phone down, nausea rising. They were painting me as the problem, reframing my father's violence into my supposed weakness. Nora gritted her teeth, her voice steady. "This is a smear campaign. We treat it as such." But the attacks kept coming. That evening, Paul himself arrived, pounding on my apartment door with the arrogance of a man who had never faced consequences. His voice thundered through the thin wood. "Open up, Clara. We need to talk." When I refused, his tone shifted from faux concern to venom. "You will sign it. Do you hear me? You will sign it, or I swear you will regret this more than the punch." The walls shook with his rage, and for a moment fear surged inside me, but then Nora stood beside me, calm as steel, dialing the police, and speaking in her crisp lawyer's tone, reporting a threat and harassment. The sound of her voice reminded me that fear was their weapon and silence their shield. I would give them neither. Paul eventually stormed off, cursing me loud enough for neighbors to hear, and I leaned against the wall, shaking, realizing that my family had declared total war. Richard wielded money and connections. Margaret wielded words. Paul wielded intimidation. Together, they formed a machine of control that had ground me down for decades, but this time, the gears would jam. Nora looked at me, her eyes sharp. This is not just family drama anymore, Clara. This is organized abuse. This is coercion. This is financial fraud and violence wrapped together. They are not just your parents and brother. They are a cartel. Her words struck me like a revelation. A cartel of blood bound by greed, demanding silence from anyone who threatened their structure. The truth settled heavy but clear in my chest. I was no longer just a daughter in pain. I was a target in a war of power, and if I did not fight back strategically, I would be erased completely. I nodded slowly, my jaw still aching, the ice pack heavy against my face, and whispered the only words that felt real. Then we fight. The next week unfolded not as quiet days of recovery, but as a battlefield where every headline and whisper became a weapon, and Richard and Margaret wielded their influence with the precision of generals. On Monday morning, the local paper ran a flattering article about Richard Dawson, quoting him as a man of family values who worked tirelessly to protect his children from the harsh realities of business. It painted him as a pillar of the community, a father concerned for a daughter too fragile to understand financial responsibility. The words were not written by him, but by a journalist who had been dining at our table for years, and when I read them, my stomach churned with rage. Nora pointed to the phrasing, her voice tight. This is not just spin, Clara. This is preemptive framing. They want the world to see you as unstable before you even speak. By Wednesday, Margaret had staged a charity luncheon complete with cameras and press releases standing beside Paul with a smile that could freeze glass, declaring her commitment to supporting youth entrepreneurship. She spoke of setbacks and second chances, her arm wrapped around Paul's shoulders, and the room erupted in applause. Watching the video online, I felt the burn of betrayal deeper than ever. They were turning Paul's ruin into a public redemption story while erasing my suffering as though it never happened. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers who had seen the coverage, some asking carefully if I was all right, others warning me that rumors were spreading about my supposed instability. My chest tightened, but Nora remained a fortress, reminding me that every attack was evidence. We would gather it all, catalog it, use it later. Still, the weight of isolation pressed hard until one night Ethan Price, a colleague from the accounting firm, called me. His voice was low, urgent, the kind that tells you something big is coming. Clara, I have something you need to see. He sent me a file he had intercepted an email chain between Richard and a business ally, and as I read the words, my breath caught. If she will not sign, she is dead to me. Let her drown. I will not lose Paul. My father had written it casually, as if declaring me dead was nothing more than moving a pawn in a game of chess. The fury that surged through me was almost blinding, but beneath it came clarity. Here was proof that this was not about my well-being, not about family loyalty, but about power, money, and control. Ethan's voice steadied me through the phone. They cannot bury this, Clara. Not if you are ready to fight. I felt the cold resolve settle in my bones. They had tried to smear me, starve me, frighten me into obedience, but this email was a blade I could wield. The next day, the narrative war grew louder. Richard appeared on a local radio station, his tone calm, his words dripping with false concern. My daughter is struggling with her emotions, he said smoothly. We love her, but sometimes love means making hard choices. Margaret echoed the lie in interviews, sighing with the poise of a saint. Clara is fragile, but we will not abandon her. To anyone listening, it sounded like compassion. To me, it was poison. Nora and I sat together in her office, surrounded by stacks of documents, screenshots, printed copies of articles, all evidence of the smear campaign. She tapped the email Ethan had provided, her eyes sharp. This is your weapon, Clara. When the time comes, we unleash it. Until then, we keep gathering. I nodded, exhaustion pressing heavy on my shoulders, but determination burning stronger. The Dawson family had declared a war of narratives, painting themselves as martyrs and me as unstable, but I knew the truth was sharper than their lies. Every insult, every article, every false smile was a thread in a rope they were tightening around their own necks. I was bruised, I was battered, but I was not broken, and when the moment came, I would pull that rope. The idea of fighting them in private had already collapsed under the weight of their smear campaign. And so by the time Nora, Ethan, and I sat around her kitchen table with papers spread like maps of war, we all knew the battlefield had to shift into the public eye. It was Ethan who suggested the venue first, his fingers moving quickly over his laptop as he pulled up announcements. "Your parents are hosting the 30th anniversary of Dawson's Woodwork," he said. "Black tie, full press coverage donors, local politicians, every important face within 50 miles. Nora leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Perfect! That is where the mask comes off." My heart pounded as the plan began to take shape, fear rising but twinned with a kind of fierce anticipation. If they wanted to destroy me in whispers, then I would destroy them under spotlights. We began mapping every detail. Ethan explained how the event's AV system was being managed by a third party with sloppy digital security. He could slip in a contact as a technician, someone we trusted, who would load my evidence into the system and be ready to switch the screens at the signal. Nora insisted that we not only prepare the visuals but the context. "You cannot just show bruises, Clara. You have to frame it. This is not about a family dispute. This is about abuse, fraud, and coercion." She made me rehearse my words until they carried both pain and undeniable clarity. At night, I lay awake imagining the chandeliers, the sea of gowns and suits, the smug smile of Richard at the podium, Margaret's cold pearls gleaming, Paul basking in the false glow of redemption, and then me stepping into the spotlight not as their silent daughter, but as their accuser. It terrified me, yet the terror was electric, sharpening my resolve. We planned for contingencies. If security tried to block the feed, Ethan would have backups ready on cloud servers pushed directly to journalists' emails. If Richard tried to dismiss the images as fabricated, Nora would have timestamps, cloud logs, and the original files ready for immediate verification. If Margaret cried her crocodile tears, we would release the audio clips of her demanding I sign and be grateful. Nothing would be left to chance. Every possible escape route they might use would be blocked. Still, I wavered one night, staring at the photos of my battered face on the laptop screen. The thought of strangers gasping at my humiliation twisted my stomach. Nora saw my hesitation and spoke quietly. "Clara, they took your choice for years. This is you taking it back. If you want to stop, we stop. But if you go forward, you will never be their victim again." Her words steadied me. I realized this was not just revenge. It was survival. It was reclaiming a voice they had silenced since childhood. Ethan worked tirelessly building secure channels disguising the files so no trace led back until the moment of reveal. He even designed the exact sequence photos first, then the video of me naming names, then the email with my father's words, "If she will not sign, she is dead to me." That email would be the nail in the coffin, undeniable proof of his intent. I practiced my lines until my voice carried no tremor. "Thank you, Father, for the chance to speak about family sacrifice. Let me show you what family support has looked like for me." That sentence would be the signal, the fuse to ignite the evidence across giant screens. The days ticked down and every step felt like marching toward execution, yet beneath the fear I felt power for the first time. Richard thought of me as paperwork. Margaret thought of me as silence. Paul thought of me as his safety net. None of them imagined I could be their downfall. As the night of the gala drew near, I looked into the mirror at the fading bruises, the scar beginning to form at my jawline, and I whispered to my reflection, "You are not theirs anymore." The plan was dangerous, audacious, but perfect. For years I had been their hidden shame, their obedient daughter, their disposable tool. Soon I would be the storm that exposed them before the world. The night of the gala shimmered with the false perfection my parents had cultivated for decades. The Dawson Woodwork 30th anniversary set in a grand hotel ballroom glittering with chandeliers, marble floors polished to glass, and tables dressed in white linen and gold trim. Every detail screaming wealth and respectability. Richard moved through the crowd like a king in his court, shaking hands with politicians, nodding to judges, his voice booming with charm, while Margaret floated at his side in a sequined gown, pearls at her throat, her smile fixed like porcelain, and Paul trailed behind them, arrogant and smug, basking in reflected light, as if his failures had never existed. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes. Donors clinked glasses, and I stood at the edge of the room in my modest black dress, Ethan disguised among the AV staff across the hall. Nora seated near the front with her notepad, her eyes steady on me. My hands trembled, but I pressed them into fists and reminded myself of the vow I had made. Tonight was not about me being broken. Tonight was about making them answer. When the lights dimmed and the MC announced Richard, the room erupted in applause, and he took the podium with practiced ease, beginning a speech he had delivered 100 times before. He spoke of legacy of sacrifice, of the strength of family, his voice heavy with false sincerity. Margaret dabbed at her eye for the cameras. Paul nodded solemnly, and the crowd drank it all in, hungry for the image of a noble family. My stomach knotted, but I waited heart-pounding until Richard shifted to his climax. Tonight, he said, I want to honor the pride of my life, my daughter Clara, who will carry our family into the future. Applause thundered. All eyes turned to me. The spotlight found me, heat blazing on my skin, and my legs carried me forward, each step slow, deliberate, my pulse drumming in my ears. Richard extended his hand, smiling wide, whispering low enough for only me to hear. Do not ruin this. Say what I told you. I stepped to the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces, the cameras, the flashing lights, and for a heartbeat, the weight threatened to crush me. But then I remembered the rug stained with my blood. Margaret's voice demanding I sign Paul's laughter as I fell. My jaw throbbed, my scar burning like fire, and I let the rage steady me. Thank you, Father, I began, my voice clear calm, carrying across the room. Thank you for teaching me about sacrifice. Let me share with you what sacrifice in this family has looked like for me. That was the signal. Behind me, the massive screen flickered the Dawson logo, vanishing, replaced by the brutal clarity of my swollen face, the photo I had taken the night of the assault. Purple and red bruises, blooming lip split, blood staining my skin. Gasps swept through the ballroom, a wave of shock freezing glasses mid-air. The image changed now, the video of me speaking into the camera, my voice, clinical and calm, naming names, detailing Richard's punch, Margaret's complicity, Paul's demands. The crowd shifted whispers, rising journalists scribbling furiously. Then came the audio. Richard's growl filling the speakers. I built you. I can destroy you. Do not test me. The room exploded. Shouts of disbelief, outrage, flashes of cameras like lightning donors stumbling to leave reporters rushing forward. Microphones raised. Richard's face drained of color, his mouth opening in fury. Margaret clutching her pearls, eyes wide with horror. Paul frozen in shock. I stood steady, letting it all wash over me. Then Ethan triggered the final blow. The email filled the screen. Richard's words undeniable. If she will not sign, she is dead to me. Let her drown. I will not lose Paul. The audience roared, journalists shouting questions, the image burning into every mind present. Margaret tried to stand to weep, to cry out about betrayal, but her voice was drowned by the uproar. Richard pounded the podium, his voice cracking. This is lies. But no one believed him. The evidence was too precise, too damning. In that moment, the ballroom doors opened and uniformed officers entered with calm authority, led by a prosecutor who stepped directly to the stage. Richard Dawson, Margaret Dawson, Paul Dawson, you are under investigation for assault, coercion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The cameras flashed as handcuffs clicked, Richard thrashing, Margaret sobbing, Paul pleading. The dynasty they had built collapsed under the weight of truth displayed larger than life. As they were led away, I remained at the microphone, my voice steady though my heart thundered. For years I was silent, forced to serve, forced to bleed. Tonight I speak not just for myself, but for anyone who has been told their pain was less than family image, less than money, less than a rug. The room erupted in applause, some tentative, some furious, all electric. Journalists shouted, "Do you plan to press charges? Will you testify?" I looked at them, then at Nora, who nodded firmly. Yes, this is only the beginning. The gala meant to celebrate a legacy became the graveyard of their lies, and I walked off the stage no longer their daughter but their accuser. My scar no longer shame, but proof of survival. My voice no longer silenced, but amplified to every corner of the room. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth was meant to be carved into stone. Yet as I walked through its tall doors, weeks after the gala, I knew truth would be tested like never before. Reporters lined the steps, microphones thrust forward, flashes blinding voices demanding answers about the fall of the Dawson family. I kept my head high, Nora by my side, her tailored suit sharp as a blade, Ethan trailing behind with boxes of evidence. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy, packed with observers, journalists, and ordinary citizens hungry to see a dynasty collapse. Richard sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his face pale, but his eyes still sharp with arrogance. Margaret was beside him in muted gray, her pearls absent, her lips trembling with the practiced sorrow of a woman trying to look like a victim herself. Paul slouched at the far end, avoiding my gaze, his face blotchy with fear, the swagger gone. Their attorney, a sleek man named Charles Grant, radiated confidence, his tone polished, his smile calculated. He leaned toward the jury box with the ease of a man who thought money could buy belief. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. What you saw at the gala was the emotional cry of a troubled woman manipulated by opportunists, exaggerated by selective editing. My client, Richard Dawson, is a respected businessman, a father devoted to his children. The image you saw was not abuse. It was family conflict twisted into a spectacle. My stomach churned at his words, but Nora's hand on my arm steadied me. When it was our turn, she rose, her voice carrying clarity and fire. "Members of the jury, this is not about a troubled woman. This is about a man who struck his daughter so hard he shattered her jaw, about a mother who stood over her bleeding child and demanded obedience, about a brother who threatened violence to secure money he had squandered. This is about coercion, assault, fraud, and the systematic destruction of one woman's independence." She began laying out the evidence, each piece projected onto a large screen. The photos of my bruised face, the video of me naming them, the audio of Richard's threats, the email where he wrote, "I will not lose Paul." Each item landed with heavy silence in the room, the jury shifting uncomfortably, the audience murmuring. When Nora called me to the stand, I walked forward with my scar visible under the lights, my jaw tight, but my voice clear. I told them about the night of the assault, about the lifetime of erasure, about the $5 million loan they demanded. I spoke slowly, carefully, letting each word carry the weight of truth. Richard's glare burned into me, but I did not flinch. Margaret shook her head with tears sliding down her cheeks, whispering "liar" under her breath. But the jury saw the crocodile shimmer in her eyes. Paul sat rigid, jaw clenched, knowing his turn was coming. Grant cross-examined me with venom disguised as civility. "Miss Dawson," he said, his voice smooth, "you claim your father assaulted you, yet you did not report it immediately to the police. Could it be that this was a family argument exaggerated in anger?" I looked at him steadily, my voice steady though my hands trembled slightly. I did not report it because I had been conditioned my whole life to believe my voice did not matter. That is the power of abuse. That is why victims stay silent. But silence does not erase truth. Gasps rippled through the gallery, and I felt a surge of strength. Grant pressed on, trying to twist my friendship with Nora into manipulation, trying to paint Ethan as a hacker who doctored files, but each attempt collapsed under the precision of Nora's objections and the clarity of timestamps, logs, and sworn affidavits. Then came Paul's testimony. He tried at first to shield Richard, mumbling that I had overreacted, that maybe I fell. But under cross-examination, his facade cracked. Nora pressed him, her voice sharp. "Did your father ever strike Clara? Did your mother ever demand her silence? Did you threaten her at her apartment?" His face reddened, sweat pooling on his brow, and finally he broke, shouting, "Yes, fine. Yes, he hit her. Yes, she refused to sign. Yes, I threatened her." Because she was going to ruin everything. His words echoed like thunder in the courtroom, his admission sealing the coffin. Margaret cried out, "Paul, stop!" but it was too late. The damage was done. Richard slammed his fist on the table, shouting order in the courtroom, but the judge's gavel cut through, silencing him. The final blow came when a doctor testified about treating my injuries, confirming the fracture, the bruises, the timeline. Then coworkers took the stand, describing seeing me hide bruises, overhearing Richard's controlling words. Piece by piece, the truth was layered, undeniable. The jury deliberated for hours, tension thick in the courtroom, and when they returned, the verdicts fell like hammers. Richard Dawson, guilty of assault, guilty of coercion, guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, sentenced to 12 years in prison. Margaret Dawson, guilty of complicity and coercion, sentenced to 7 years. Paul Dawson, guilty of intimidation and harassment, granted a suspended sentence with strict probation, his cowardice laid bare for all to see. The courtroom erupted, some gasping, some cheering, journalists rushing to file stories. I sat frozen, the weight of years lifting my scar aching, but my soul lighter than it had ever been. Richard glared at me as he was led away in handcuffs, his voice low with fury. "You destroyed this family." I met his gaze one last time, my own voice calm. "No, you did." Margaret's sobs trailed behind her as she was taken, pearls missing, dignity stripped. Paul would live free, but marked forever by the stain of his own confession. Afterward, outside on the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. "What do you feel, Clara? What will you do next?" I took a breath, Nora and Ethan at my side, and spoke clearly. "I feel free, and I will make sure no one else is trapped like I was." That promise became action. Months later, the settlement funds, everything I received from their estate, were poured into a foundation to support survivors of domestic violence and financial coercion. The Clara Dawson Foundation opened with its first grants to young people trying to escape toxic homes. I stood at the opening ceremony, the sun warm on my scar, and felt a peace I had never known. At night, I sometimes dreamed of the marble floor, of Margaret's cold voice, of Richard's fist, but I woke to freedom, to my own apartment filled with light, to the laughter of friends who had become family. Closure did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing what to do with the pain, and I chose to build. 1 year later, I received a letter from a girl named Hannah, the first scholarship recipient, thanking me for giving her a chance to start college away from her violent stepfather. She wrote in shaky handwriting, "You saved me." I folded the letter, tears sliding silently, not of grief, but of gratitude. My past had been ashes, my future was fire. I was no longer the daughter silenced by fear. I was Clara Dawson, survivor, fighter, builder of something greater than the empire that tried to break me. And as I stood on the balcony of my new life, dawn breaking across the sky, I whispered to myself the truth I had carved out of blood and defiance. Your past does not own you. You own your future.